Yesterday, I walked out to my mailbox right before we left to go to church, and Chris Moran, he was driving by the road, and he swoops in, drives through my yard, and cuts me off before I can walk back in the house, and he says, "Hey, I had a dream about you last night." He said, "I dreamed that you had a pet dolphin that was living behind your house." And he said, "I looked at that dolphin and its fins weren't right." And he said, "I had this razor blade pocket knife." And he said, "I went out there and I got that dolphin and I cut that dolphin's fins to make its fins look better." And he said, "Then, I saw you a few weeks later and the dolphin had healed up and you were holding that dolphin on your shoulder and you were petting that dolphin. And you said, 'Chris, I know you're the one who cut my dolphin's fins.'" And Chris said, I looked you right in the eye and I just lied to you. I said, "No, I didn't do it, man. I'm serious. I didn't cut your dolphin." And you said, "No, Chris, I could tell by the way that you reacted when I asked, because you're the only one who didn't say anything." And he said, "Then I just broke down and confessed." I said, "Yes, Travis, I cut the fins of your dolphin. I'm sorry." And you looked at me and you were mad and you said, "I knew it. You're the one who did it." I think people sometimes think that spiritual things make about that much logical sense. I think that there's something that happens when spiritual things get involved that people just turn off their brain and they think that logic and reason just goes out the door. But God created logic and God created reason. And you don't live, spirituality isn't a dream world. Spirituality is the real world. It's not a dream sequence where nothing makes sense and everything's just crazy. I think people, a lot of times, they look at the Bible and that's the kind of thing that they do, that it's all this mystic craziness and they're, it's all strange. They read the book of Revelation and it makes such a dream sequence sense to them that they think that the whole thing's that way. And so that logic and reason just goes out the window. Well, logic and reason, it was created by God. Now, we may have named the thing and said, well, this is a syllogism. And so we name parts of it and we'll say this is a logical fallacy. No, we didn't create it. God created it. And God uses it over and over again. Can you think of anywhere in the Bible that God uses logic or that Jesus uses logic? See, that's a problem. Anybody? What about the one that just leaps to mind to me is in Luke chapter 6, where Jesus says, people who are well don't need a physician, but people who are sick need a physician. And I didn't come to call the righteous to repentance. I came to call sinful to repentance. So that's just logic. And it's like he's a dad talking to a little kid, and he said, "Look, I know that you think it's so-and-so, but this is the case." And so it's really like this. So today is an MDiv chapel, and we're addressing a specific topic. And what we're talking about today is the strengths of paid ministry, the strengths and weaknesses of paid ministry. Now, every year we repeat these topics, and every year somebody else gets the ability or the opportunity to stand and talk to you about these different topics. And so today it's my task to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of paid ministry. If you'll look on YouTube, we have placed these topics for the preceding years on Heritage's YouTube channel. So you can look and you can say, well, there's Corey Collins doing the strengths and weaknesses of paid ministry. Well, what I want us to do this morning is we're going to address the exact same topic, and we're probably going to hit some of the same and some different ones. But I want us to think about it. I want us to use a little logic and use a little reason to think about the strengths and weaknesses of paid ministry. I think some people, at times, I think we approach spiritual things with just this nebulous idea that it's just this cloud of confusion that we can't wade through. Well, I think we can approach it very reasonably, very rationally, very logical, and we just weigh those things out and look at the different aspects and the different pros and cons of paid ministry. There are a few great things about being a full-time minister, and there are a few great things about being a part-time minister, and there are a few great things about being an unpaid, uncompensated. Really, I think in some sense those terms are almost misnomers in a way, because I've had jobs where I have been significantly overpaid. And those bring with it some great things and some bad things. And I've had jobs where I've been significantly underpaid. And those things bring with it some good things and some bad things. And so really, in a lot of ways, I think that what we're talking about is being significantly overpaid or being significantly underpaid as a minister. And so if you are, there are some great things. If you are able to be a full-time paid minister, if you're able to be a full-time paid minister, I think there are some terrific benefits to that. One of the first one is, I would say, that you have one job. You have one line of work. I have had jobs in ministry, and I'm kind of doing that way now. Right now, I work with the board at Indian Creek Youth Camp. I work here. I do Titus Camp here. All of those things require surprisingly more work than just 1 week a year. I work with Collinwood Church of Christ. I do mission trips. Anytime I can go with one of the barriers, I go with one of them. And every once in a while, if I can't jump in with one of their trips, I'll take my own and go somewhere. And those things require a lot of time. And so my attention is very divided. On the other hand, when I was a paid full-time minister, I was able to focus on one thing. I've got several friends that I thought, and I've told them, if you could just focus on one thing, you would just be amazing. But their attention is so divided that they're doing so many different things that they can't focus on one thing, and they're pretty good at several different things. If they could focus on one thing, they would just be absolutely amazing. And so when you're a full-time paid preacher, wouldn't it be, how great would it be to be able to have the time? I live in constant, I'm behind the 8 ball all the time because I've got to find my places that I can study to prepare 3 or 4 lessons a week. Wouldn't it be great if you just had the ability, your job was to go and you were to sit down in your office and somebody says, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're just going to pay you full time to go sit down in your office and you work on your lesson. Wouldn't that be amazing? A couple of weeks ago, Ray Reynolds was in my office and we were talking about Titus Camp, and Michael Jackson came in. And we were sitting there and we were kicking some different things around, and we were all talking, and Ray said, have you ever noticed that Simon Peter, that Jesus sometimes calls him Bar Jonah? And I'm like, yeah, every time there's a fish story, he says Bar Jonah. And Michael is saying, yeah, Jesus has this infatuation, and that in the text where he says Bar Jonah, if you look in the Gospel of John, that's where he says, lovest thou me more than these? Feed my sheep. And he's talking about these are fish. Do you love me more than you love the fish? And he says, Simon Bar Jonah. But what's Simon's dad's name? Is it Jonah? John? So Jesus is working really hard to get the Jonah in there. Why? Because, and it all hits us like at the same time this light bulb comes on. Peter is a Jonah story. I've never heard anybody say it before. Peter is Jonah. And for 3 weeks, I have wanted to go dig in and look at Peter being Jonah, and I don't have the time to do it because I want to preach Jonah. Peter's Jonah. Jonah is supposed to go preach to the Ninevites, and he doesn't want to. Who does Peter preach to? He's sent to the Gentiles, right? Then he goes to the house of Cornelius. He doesn't want to go. He's up on the housetop. He has a vision. The Lord says go. Peter is a Jonah. He's a Jonah story. I want to go dig into that. I'm just dying. I've never heard anybody say that before, and I'm just dying to go dig into that. I can't dig into that. I don't have time for that. Wouldn't it be great if you were just paid to study? It'd be great. It'd be amazing. Well, that's what a full-time preacher, a lot of times I think they get that. Or they get the time to visit. I've got 2 or 3 people at the hospital this week that I have needed to go see. It's terrible to say, but I feel like I don't have the time to do that because I've got too many my immediate needs yell louder than the important needs, and so I feel like I have to do the things that are immediate. I don't have the time to go do that. I wish I had the time to go do that. The paid minister, that is an amazing, if you're a full-time preacher, you have an amazing job. When I was recruiting, I used to recruit for the school full-time. And when I was recruiting, I would go around, I would talk to people, and I would say, that guy, he's going to church somewhere, and he's doing some preaching somewhere, and he's working at a full-time job somewhere. And I would tell him, I'm like, what can you imagine Wouldn't it be awesome if there was somebody who just said, hey, look, I'll pay you full time to go visit sick people? Wouldn't that be awesome? I'll pay you full time to just go study the Bible. Wouldn't that be awesome? You know what we call that guy? Preacher. That'd be great. That'd be an awesome job. We call that guy a preacher. Every once in a while I'll run into somebody, and I don't know why it's this way, but they'll say something to the effect of, and this happens surprisingly often, but they'll say, I want to be a consultant. What do you want to be? I want to be a consultant. I'm like, oh, what you want is you want people to pay to come and to listen to what you have to say. You know what we call that guy in the church? We call him a preacher. It's pretty good. In a lot of ways, it's a pretty good job. As a matter of fact, if you just craft up and you say, you know what I want to do? I want to have the freedom, the flexibility to not have to go punch a time clock, and you just create your perfect dream job. I want to be able to read the Bible if I want to and study the Bible. And I want to be able to go visit people. And I just want to go chat and talk to people and sit in their houses. And I want to go drive around and see everybody and kind of hobnob and glad hand everybody. I want to be in a position where 200 people come every week to listen to me talk for 3 hours. And they pay me a good full-time salary to do that. And then if my wife calls, I can just leave my job and go do whatever she wants. That's what I want. That's what full-time paid ministry is in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, I think there are some unbelievable perks. It's your life. It's your life. People get too divided when you're doing part-time ministry. I think your life, you're constantly living this dichotomous existence where there are two parts of your being and you're going in two different directions all the time. And it would be great if you could just focus on one thing, and that's what full-time ministry allows you to do. Now, there are some negatives. There's some negatives. In a few minutes, I think we're going to end with plenty of time, and so we'll open the floor to some of you other guys to throw out some of the things that you think are positive and some of the things that you think are negatives. But I think sometimes we feel like we're working for other people. So I think sometimes we feel like we're living off of other people. And I think that there's a very negative feeling. And I talk to a lot of preachers, and a lot of preachers will say, I don't feel good about the fact that I'm living off out of the church treasury. Or that there are all little old ladies who are putting their money in the collection plate, and that's paying my salary. I feel odd about that. I feel awkward about that. Well, the New Testament, I think, covers that pretty well over and over again. Paul talks about it. But I think we also see that issue in Paul's life. Paul says, I could have done that. I could have had every right to do that, but I didn't do that because I didn't want to feel like I was taking something from you. And so I think Paul spends a lot of time saying, I could have done that. There's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't muzzle the ox. You should. And he's obviously making the analogy that we pay full-time ministers and that we pay the elders. The elder who rules well, let him be worthy of double honor. We're not talking about good job. That's not what we're talking about. So there are several different passages in the New Testament. He talks about it in 1 Timothy chapter 5. He talks about it in 2 Thessalonians. He talks about it in Corinthians and multiple places. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with taking that. But it is a negative because I think if we're not careful, we feel that way. It does make us feel a little strange. And I think we like the idea of not being, Paul says, I didn't want to be a burden to you. I didn't take anything because I didn't want to be a burden to you. And I think we don't want to be a burden. And that's probably healthy that we don't want to be a burden. Stephen Guy, I used to hear him say in class that when I was a student, he would say this one phrase. He would say, I'm not paid to preach. And that really resonated with me. I love that. Had no idea what he meant, but I love that. And so then I was at a church one time where we had one of our graduates who graduated, and he was a student, Stephen Guy. And in class, he got up in class and he said, I am not paid to preach. And one of the people in class, this kindly, gentle old man, kind of raised his hand, and he happened to be the treasurer, and he was a very stately banker. And he said, well, now, I think that's exactly what we pay you for. I think we pay you to preach. And the class just had one of those, chirp, because the guy didn't know how to respond to that. Well, think I've matured a little bit. I think I understand now. Stephen was saying, well, you support my ministry. The church supports my ministry. You allow me to have this job where I get to go visit people full time. I get to study full time, and I get to prepare lessons, and I get to teach. I get to do that, and you support my ministry. Well, I think, I understand that now, and that's the perspective that he had. He didn't have the perspective of, I'm a burden on you, or that you're paying me, and I'm some employer-employee. Well, I'm in this employer-employee relationship. He thought of himself as, I'm a minister. The brethren, out of the goodness and love of their heart, support me so that I can be this guy who goes around and does full-time ministry. I think in a lot of senses that's what Paul says, because he commends the Philippian church. You sent to me. To why? So that Paul could be allowed to go around and be this minister. So I think that is a negative, but you can also think of that in a different way. A lot of that has to do with, I think, your attitude. One of the negatives is, because if you're significantly overcompensated, I think that you have this thing that you'll put this on top of you, where people look at you and they expect you to do everything. They expect a lot out of you. If you're a preacher who makes $120,000 a year, I think that there's a certain set of parameters that are put on top of you, and that you need to act like that guy. You need to act like that preacher who's worth $120,000 a year. On the other hand, the average part-time preaching job, my experience, the average little run-of-the-mill part-time preaching job, if you're preaching for a church of 40 members, you're in the $250 range per week range. What do you think? That's pretty close. That's my experience. The average run-of-the-mill little 30-member church, they're paying somewhere around $250 a week. And if you show up at the hospital, they are blown away, because they don't expect that. They don't expect that. If you are paying $120,000 a year and you don't show up at the hospital, we have a completely different set of expectations on you. And so you better be at everything. And I think that we have a tendency to set those kind of parameters on ourselves, where we make it very, very difficult for us. And I think as ministers, when you become a full-time minister, it's very easy for us to get into this thing of, I can't do enough. Remember that passage in Matthew where the disciples say, let's pass over to Capernaum and to go to the valley, and what they're referring to is there's a place there that's a spa, and what they want to do is go rest, and Jesus responds to them. He says, how can you rest when there are people who are lost in the world? There are people who are sick, and that they need to come unto me. You remember that? No, because I just made all that up. Obviously, none of that's true. Jesus is the one whose ministry is punctuated by periods of rest. Jesus is the one. How can he sleep at night? If you have the ability to heal sick people, how can you sleep at night when there are sick people in Florence? I would just touch people and make them well until I passed out, and then I would have helpers around me who just held my hand and let people walk by and touch my garments. Don't wash that. If you could, mail that over to so-and-so, because I want them to be able to touch that garment. I'll just wear one a day, and y'all mail these garments out across the world, and so I can heal more people. And what we would do is we would burn out and die within a few weeks, because we would not sleep. But Jesus, he has his ministry punctuated by these periods of rest. And we have a tendency to think, how can I rest? There are people who are lost and dying in this world, and I got to go out and I've got to do everything. I've got to see everybody. I've got to preach every sermon. I've got to do everything. And so I think that we have a tendency to put these parameters on ourselves that where we drive ourselves crazy, we burn out, and then we've got to go roof houses for a year. And that's what happened to me. Almost every preacher I know, that's what they do. My first job, after a couple years of my first job, I didn't want anything else to do with ministry. So I decided I was done, and I went and started building barns and roofing houses. And within a week, I was preaching at a church. And I preached at that same church for 5 straight years while I built houses and barns. I worked full-time at the police department. I worked night shift at the police department. So I could get off at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, drive 50 miles to the little church that I preached at. I'd teach a class, preach, and then I would drive back. I would take a nap, get an hour or two nap, drive back 50 miles, preach Sunday night, drive back, and they let me come in at 10 o'clock on Sunday night as opposed to 6 o'clock when I was supposed to come in. And I was work from 6 or 10 o'clock Sunday night to 6 o'clock Monday morning. Let me tell you, there's some benefits to full-time paid ministry. Start meeting yourself coming the other direction when you're doing that. There are some tremendous benefits for working with the Lord. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul says that your work in the Lord is not in vain. Your work in the Lord is not in vain. Those barns, man, those houses are already, they need to be re-roofed. You know, those houses need to be re-roofed. I think that we did some tangible good in the world, ministry. Some of you have heard that story. I tell the story about being in a fight with this guy in Arkansas. I think it was on Saturday night. I had to go preach that next morning. You know, I'm all scratched up after I've been in this fight with this guy. And, you know, he had beat up his sister, and he was on meth, and we had this huge fight that destroyed this grandmother's house trailer. And I have on several occasions told that story in detail. And it's relatively funny, I think. So we arrest that guy. Yeah, it's funnier, you know, removed from the situation. And so that's a lot funnier now than it was at the time. But yeah, I think it's a relatively funny story, and I think I can make a pretty good point with it. I got kind of nostalgic the other day, and I typed in that guy's name, and it popped up that one of my buddies shot him and killed him a couple weeks ago. I was able to put him in prison for a few years, you know, take him off the street. And then he came at one of the police officers prepared to go with a knife, and they shot him and they killed him. Probably, I mean, I don't know about how to judge the tangible good I did as a police officer. I don't know, and that's one of the most frustrating things about a minister, too, is that you don't have a scorecard. You can't judge the tangible good that you do right now. I think there'll come a day when you can judge the tangible good that you did as a minister. Because your work in the Lord is not vain. And you remember how he ends that in 1 Corinthians chapter 16? That you remember the household of Stephanus, what did they do? In the King James it says they addicted themselves to the ministry. We don't talk about the war on drugs anymore because we are not going to win the war on drugs. Because police officers are not addicted to arresting drug dealers. But drug dealers are addicted to drugs and to selling drugs. And what Paul says is, do you remember the household of Strenths? That they addicted themselves to the ministry. I think the American Standard and NIV, they all translate that a little bit differently. Some of them say they dedicated themselves. Well, that's one of those ones I would probably, you know, I got my sermon on they addicted themselves to the ministry, and I read that one out of King James because I like the way that gives me a mental image. I think we need to be ministry addicts who walk around here doing ministry. You know, ministry addicts, most drug dealers, they don't deal drugs to make money. Most drug dealers deal drugs to get drugs because they can't afford to do their habit without that substance. If we're ministry addicts, we're not doing it. But it sure is nice when somebody pays you full time to satisfy your addiction. It's a pretty good gig if you're an addict of ministry. It's interesting, too, that Paul tells Timothy, don't be a lover of money. I know there are guys out there who are doing a lot of good work because there's money involved. Don't be an addict of the ministry. There are drug dealers out there. Who sell drugs for money. And they usually do get pretty wealthy. If you can stay away from the drugs and just sell the drugs, they're usually doing pretty well. And they're really difficult to catch as a police officer. The guy who gets high, he's easier to catch as a drug dealer. And you know, he got high, he messed up, and you get to catch him. The other guys are really sly. They're a little bit more difficult. And I think the same's true. It's hard for us to catch those ministers who are out there just doing it for the money right now. I don't think that's the way, that's not the methodology to go about it. The methodology is you go be an addict to ministry. And once you get your fit, a drug dealer, they got gear 1 and gear 2. Gear 1 is, I am high. Gear 2 is, how can I get high? And if you're an addict to the ministry, you're out there looking, how can I serve? Or I'm serving. I'm serving somebody, and as soon as you finish serving, you're out there doing ministry, and as soon as you finish that ministry, you're looking for another opportunity to do ministry. That's a lot better methodology. So I think there are some pros and some cons to paid full-time ministry. Oh, well, we got just a minute. Are any of you other guys who have been involved in professional ministry or vocational ministry, is there something that you want to throw out there?
You know, I think about the first time when I started teaching my son how to do some chores, and for instance, cutting grass. You know, you say you pay him to do some chore to give him incentive. Well, truth be told, the first few times, maybe the first few years, he cut the grass. He wasn't deserving of what he got paid. But that's because I had the foresight to realize that he would be at some point. And I think the same is true with us in the ministry as well. A lot of times people get frustrated because they either think they're overqualified for it, frustrated, or they're actually underqualified and they're paid for it. But the people who hire them oftentimes have the foresight to realize, you know what, this will nurture and grow, they will mature. And so I think when you're going into paid ministry, it can be daunting, but realize that oftentimes your leaders are going to be as loving and patient with you, and they're growing you into it, if you don't even realize it. And the day's coming you will be worth every penny of that. And so don't jump out of it because you don't feel worthy of it. Grow into it.
That's a great point. Grow into it, and you have counsel around you. Use your counsel. So the teachers that you're developing relationships right now, the friends that you're developing relationships with right now, those will be your counsel. Proverbs says, where much counsel is, there is wisdom. I love the fact that always, there are 3 devotionals I've given you. I don't know if you can notice that, but you can use the Wednesday night comes around, you need a devotional, you can use the logic. God used logic. And then those who come to the physician are the ones who need to be healed. Then addicted themselves to ministry, use that one. The wise counsel. I love on Star Trek, whenever there's a real bad problem that happened, always, Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard, he always says, suggestions. And he lets all of his bridge officers throw a suggestion in. And then he'll either pick the one that he likes the best, or he'll pick something totally different. But he always asks for counsel. I need counsel. I need wisdom. Everybody throw in your idea. I think sometimes we think leadership is just running over everybody and doing it your own way. One of the things that's going to help you in your ministry is to develop wise counselors and ask them for suggestions. So catch Jeremy and say, hey, I've got this problem. Or catch the president and say, I've got this issue. Dr. Pagans, could you help me? I'm struggling with this. How do I deal with this guy? And so select your counselors and get that wise counsel and grow into your ministry.